Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendments and call up my amendment number 423 as modified with the changes at the desk.
Is there objection? Without objection, the clerk will record the amendment.
The senator from Florida, Mr. Rubio, proposes an amendment number 423 as modified.
Mr. President, I ask consent that the reading of the amendment be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. So during this administration, let me begin by saying that I believe defense spending is the most important obligation of the federal government. That doesn't mean we throw money away or we put money in places where it doesn't belong or we fund projects that have no utility. But it does mean that the most important thing the federal government does for America is defend it. And we have benefited from the fact that for the last 100 years, America has had the most powerful military force on the planet. This is especially true since the end of the Second World War. There have been times in our history when we've tried to save money by cutting back on defense spending, and each and every time has forced us to come back later and spend even more to make up for it. Interesting to point that in times in the past when we've taken what they call a peace dividend, in essence, this idea that the world is no longer unstable or unsafe, and we can now spend less on defense, each and every time we've had to come back and make up for it later as a new threat emerged. I don't think we can make the argument that this is a time where the world is stable or peaceful. And yet this is a time of dramatic reductions in defense spending. During this administration, first came defense cuts of over $480 billion over 10 years. Adding insult to injury, by the way, was that the savings that were found in the defense budget were redirected to already bloated domestic programs. In fact, Secretary Gates wrote in his memoirs about the extent to which he was forced to cut costs, saying, and I quote, "No other department had done anything comparable, even proportionally," end quote. This was then followed by tens of billions more in defense cuts each year through sequestration, which will add up to a total of $1 trillion over the next decade, despite the warnings of 3 secretaries of defense and our entire military leadership. All in all, inflation-adjusted defense spending has declined 21% since 2010, and even if we discount the drawdowns in Iraq and Afghanistan, it has still declined by a dangerous 12%. This is happening, by the way, at the same time as China is undergoing the most expansive, most aggressive defense increase in modern history, at a time when Russia, despite being eviscerated by economic sanctions, has held their defense spending largely harmless, at a time when the rise of radical Islam around the world, both the rise of ISIS, the existence of al-Qaeda and other groups like al-Nusra and the Khorasan group and others, pose an ongoing threat to the United States. This at a time when many of our potential adversaries like North Korea and Iran are developing long-range rocket capabilities that could reach the continental United States. This is the worst possible time to be reducing our defense spending, and yet that is what we are doing, and we are setting ourselves up for danger. I would recognize that people who've worked hard on this budget have tried to find new ways to address this through contingency funding. I respect the work they've done, and ultimately that may be where we wind up. But before we do, it's important for this body to have a serious debate about how we are underfunding defense spending in this country and the dangers it poses for our future, and that is the purpose of this amendment. The purpose of this amendment is to replace the defense numbers in this budget with the projected fiscal year 2016 number from the fiscal year 12 Gates budget. This was the last defense budget, the Gates budget, that was put together solely on the assessment of the threats we face and the requisite military needs to deal with it. It is the budget that the bipartisan, congressionally mandated National Defense Panel stated was the minimum required to reverse course and set the military on more stable footing. With that, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that I be allowed to enter into a colloquy with my colleague from Arkansas, Senator Cotton.
Without objection.
And I'd ask Senator Cotton, who has extensive experience both serving in uniform and then here in the Senate as well as in the House, his views on the dangers that this poses, the rate that we are reducing military spending, and what it means for the long-term security of the United States.
I thank the gentleman from Florida, and I'm pleased to offer this amendment with him. I do agree that it's critical that we have this debate on what we should be spending on our military. While I respect the work of the Budget Committee, I also call attention to the views of the chairman and the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, on which I sit, that they would spend $577 billion on defense next year, which would eliminate sequestration. I suggest, as the gentleman from Florida did, that we need to look to the views of the National Defense Panel, which did draw from Secretary Gates' fiscal year 2012 budget, projecting into fiscal year 2016, why Secretary Gates had a reputation as a reformer. He had already found over $450 billion of savings in the Department of Defense at that time. It's hard to say there was much fat left. Second, as the gentleman from Florida pointed out, that was the last time the Department of Defense engaged in what we should do in this body, which is the budgeting for the military based on the threats that we face and the strategy we need, not having a strategy that is driven by the budget. But that's not enough. As the National Defense Panel said itself, at $611 billion, that projection is not enough. And why is it not enough? Some of the threats that the gentleman from Florida identified. In the last 4 years, what have we seen? The Islamic State on the rise, rampaging across Iraq and Syria, Iran racing towards a nuclear weapon, even as it exerts greater control and dominance over Baghdad, Damascus, Beirut, and now Sana'a. We've seen Russian revisionism invading a sovereign country in the heart of Europe, shooting a civilian airliner out of the sky in the heart of Europe, and China on the rise, developing military capabilities that are quite clearly directed against the United States and our allies in the first island chain. That is why we need this debate. That is why we need the military budget the gentleman from Florida and I are proposing, because the eyes of the world are upon us, not just our enemies, but our allies as well, wondering if America will not only have the resolve to stand by its commitments, but if it will have the capabilities to stand by those commitments, whoever the commander-in-chief may be. But there's one final important group whose eyes are on this institution this week. It's our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen, and our Marines, who are wondering if the elected representatives of the people will stand with them, will provide them the resources they need to be ready to be trained, equipped, ready to fight our nation's wars so they don't have to fight them in the first place. Earlier today, I had the great benefit of being able to meet with a group of Army majors and captains, the mid-career officers, just like the mid-career non-commissioned officers who are the backbone of our military. Two of those men I started officer candidate school with Fort Benning at 10 years ago this coming Friday, one of whom has been seriously injured. To a person, they all said that training is down, families are strained, operations are stressed, equipment is overused, and they wanted to know, will the Congress of the United States give them the tools they need to fight and win our country's wars? That's why I'm proud to stand here with the gentleman from Florida to offer this amendment and say that, yes, we will stand by them. And yes, we will make sure that they are ready to fight and win our wars so they don't have to win them, or they don't have to fight them in the first place. And now I'd be happy to yield back to the gentleman from Florida.
I would just, not much to add to what the senator from Arkansas has pointed out, and as he well knows, the importance of the promise we've made the men and women of our armed services, and that is that we will never put them in a fair fight. It will always be an unfair fight to their advantage. They will be the best trained, best equipped, and best taken care of fighting men and women on the planet. We cannot keep that commitment if we continue to reduce spending on the military and on defense at the rate that we're going today. I would add one more point, and that is that much of world security today is based upon American military alliances that are built upon American military assurances. So, for example, in Asia-Pacific region, where the Japanese, the South Koreans, and other allies in the region look to an American umbrella of defense to provide them certainty in face of real risks, whether it's territorial claims made by China that are illegitimate or the nuclear threat of North Korea. Why haven't the South Koreans developed their own nuclear weapon? Because they believe the United States will be there to help them defend themselves. Why have the Japanese never felt compelled to use their technological know-how to build a nuclear program? Because they believe the United States is their ally and will come to their collective self-defense. Now, these countries do their own spending. The Japanese are a very capable military force and a great force multiplier in the region, despite not being called a military force. The South Koreans are a very impressive fighting force and a very courageous history. But that American security alliance in the region is critical to the long-term stability and security of that region. A region where a lot of global growth is happening on the economic front, where 50, 60, 70% of global trade and commerce transits through the South and East China Sea, and the U.S. Navy's presence in the region, along with our other branches, are critical for the defense of the region. The same is true with the NATO alliance in Europe. It relies on American security guarantees. The same is true if a terrible deal, God forbid, is arrived at by this administration with Iran. our partners and allies in the region, particularly Saudi Arabia and others, are going to look to the United States and say, well, what are you going to do to help us protect from an Iranian nuclear weapon and from the missiles that they are able to acquire? So what's going to happen when they turn? And we say to them, we're with you, we're going to be there, we're going to continue to work with you, we're going to continue to live up to our defense capabilities, but we don't have the capability to meet our obligations. In essence, you can talk about pivoting to Asia, but you have to have something to pivot it with. And if we've eviscerated our military, we've eviscerated our naval capacity, if we are on pace as we are now to have the smallest Air Force and the smallest Navy that we've had in a very long time, we can say whatever we want. Our allies won't believe us because we won't have the capabilities to meet it. And the other challenge that we have is when we talk about modernization, we are not talking about the commander-in-chief today. When we decide how much money we are going to spend on modernizing our military capabilities, what we are deciding is what are the technologies and tools that are going to be available to a future commander-in-chief in 5, 10, or 15 years. These innovative systems that we use today that have cut down on civilian casualties, that allow to improve our targeting, our intelligence gathering capabilities, that have made the United States the premier fighting force in all of human history, all of those things were developed a decade ago or longer through years of experimentation and testing, through innovation. So if we cut back on that now, in 10 years, a future commander-in-chief will be faced with a threat to our national security, and it will not have the latest, greatest technology on the planet to address it. What about the asymmetrical capabilities that China and others are developing? Instead of trying to out-aircraft carrier us, they build weapons to destroy aircraft carriers. And as we try to adjust to that threat, what's going to happen in a few years if we don't keep pace? The absence of a long-range bomber, the need to replace an aging submarine fleet, a Navy that's headed for a catastrophic low number of ships. All of these things need to be confronted, not to mention the fact that we are not modernizing at an efficient and effective rate our nuclear arsenal, which is a key part of our deterrent in a world where China and Russia and others have significant stockpiles of weapons, particularly the Russians. All of these things are important, and these are long-range, long-term decisions that will have an impact on a future Congress, on a future commander-in-chief, and on our children and grandchildren, who will be the ones that will have to live in that world. And I promise you that a world where America is no longer the most capable fighting force on the planet is a world that is more chaotic and less safe. So I look forward to having a debate on this. And I encourage my colleagues to rally around these numbers. This is what we should be funding defense at, as my colleague, the senator from Arkansas, accurately pointed out, and I'm honored to work with him on this. We should have defense spending that should drive, the strategy should not be driven by the defense spending should be driving the strategy. In essence, to put it succinctly, we should not have a strategy that's based on limited resources. We're going to have to do the best we can with limited resources. We should first outline a strategy. This is what the strategy should be for the future of our country to keep it safe. And then we should fund that strategy, not the other way around. And that is not what we're doing now. And we are setting a dangerous precedent. And more importantly, we are putting at risk the national security of this country. And once you've made that decision, it is very difficult to reverse in a timely way. We have learned this lesson the hard way multiple times in our history. I hope we don't have to learn it again. So I look forward to working with the senator from Arkansas on this amendment and with my colleagues with great respect for the work that's gone into this budget and the work of many others that are equally committed to the national defense of our country. I acknowledge the hard work they've put into finding a solution to get more money into defense, but it's not enough. Everyone knows that. And the sooner we deal with this, the safer our country is going to be.